Hello, today we are going to paint this scene of Stony Brook Harbor at low tide, which is always interesting. It shows us a little bit more of the texture in the water, the sunlight effect on the small tide pools, as you can see. So before you start painting, you should always either, if you're going to take your own photos, is think about the composition while you're taking the picture. So in this case, I tried to get a decent balance. Well, here we go. We're going to start with a wash. Basically, there is a very faint drawing underneath, extremely simple. There's not really much there. Unfortunately, this video was taken during a live demonstration, so I had to use a webcam, which isn't as good as quality as my regular iPhone. Believe it or not, an iPhone is really good for video. All right, so let's get into this. Cobalt blue, ultramarine blue for the sky, and cadmium red and cadmium yellow with a little bit of yellow ochre to kind of deaden it a little bit. You'll see that I'm working on a sort of like a gator board kind of backing here. So my paper is actually buckling right in the middle, which is always problematic. So if that happens, you'll see that I'm going to be moving the artwork up and down, sideways. You're going to see me manipulate it that way, banging it on the table, not in frustration, but just to get the water to kind of come down and just move from left to right instead of top down or sitting in that puddle. So here we go. Sometimes you have to do this. Let gravity do some of the work for you. We still have the effect. It hasn't really interfered too much. And now we're going in wet into wet with all the other areas. Now I'm adding a significant amount of purple, dioxine purple, to represent the textures that were in the foreground, like the semi-dry sand or the moist sand. I've always found, living here on Long Island, that like at sunrise or sunset, and you look at the sand and you look at the colors of the sky, the sand always kind of represents it almost, because it's semi-wet, it picks up the colors of the sky. So sometimes when we have those low light conditions, it almost has this cerulean purple effect. So that's what we're going for here. Now, as you can see, I was wiping out some areas, but the areas on the painting that you see are pure white were actually left there deliberately. I did go over them, trying to keep them from getting washed. All right. So when I started this painting, it started not wet into wet. It started with a lot of large washes, and then in time it becomes wet into wet as you're painting. But this allows you to have these openings in the sky and in the water. So think about that when you're painting. Not everything has to be wet into wet. Just make sure that you have all of your paints, your washes ready to go, because you have to paint fast. You can't stop and mix colors or find out that you don't have the color you need and then try to find the tube, and you can't do that. Those colors have to be there. So you have to have your blues, you have to have your yellows, you have to have all the colors. I'm speaking on this painting, your oranges and the reds and so forth. You have to have those ready to go as soon as possible, because those washes in the sky have to blend, right? They're blending on their own accord. We're not really doing much but putting wet paint next to one pigment of wet paint next to another pigment of wet paint. So think about that when you're painting. Remember, you always, and even in order to paint loosely, it still has to be thought out. I hate to use the word contrived because it's a derivative, but you have to think things through. And some people might, well, they might think that it's a little overworked. I'm sorry, not overworked, but contrived. It's not that. You have to know where you're going to go before you go there. Um, it's a matter in watercolor. It's a matter if you're painting in this process, in this spontaneous, loose fashion. Um, there's actually more. I told my classes that, yeah, you can paint a very, very tight photographic painting. Your goal there is to recreate the image as photographically as possible. So in watercolor, because it's a transparent medium, we can keep working and working and working and putting, small uh, washes over light washes and achieve this amazing effect of realism. Um, and it's a laborious process, I know, because I was an illustrator. I am an illustrator. Well, when I was working, um, analog instead of digital, these things took time. But if you want to paint in this fashion, you have to perceive and think through where you're going to put your textures, where those washes are going to be, where the subsequent washes are going to affect future washes, right? All of these things have to come into play when you're working in this way. So right now, getting back to the painting, you can almost see that there's something happening, that there is form starting to take shape here. And that's what we want to do. And we want to try to get nice darks in the foreground. That's always a great way to bring the viewer into the painting. The Brandywine School, Dean Cornwall, and N.C. Wyeth, and even Norman Rockwell, for that matter, too. All those illustrators use this technique. Bigger shapes, darker shapes in the foreground to bring you into the painting. It's almost like an invitation, a visual invitation, if you will, to bring your eye into the picture. So that's what we're doing here. But we're also creating texture, and we're trying to keep it loose, right? Now, this technique, I do have to preface by saying that if I was outside and I was there at sunset at Stony Brook Harbor on Long Island, I would be painting the exact same way. There would be nothing different, right? I wouldn't change just because I'm in a studio. This painting took me less than an hour to paint, and now that it's sped up 4 times, so it's like 16 minutes or so, give or take. So what I'm trying to say is that I would be painting in a way that would be quick to try to get the effect. So if we look back at the beginning, when I first put those washes in, that would have been the effect. That would have been the big thing that we really want to get in the painting first. And once we achieve that, then everything is kind of taking from that light and putting form in and trying to put the form in a way that it's harmonious to our effect, which is, in this case, that beautiful sunset on the water. And you can see that the darks are broken up. There's purples, there's blues, there's gray. I think I did use a little bit of Payne's gray. I think I dipped it in accidentally, but I didn't mind it. You could use neutral tints too, if you wanted to get your colors not to be as bright. That's not usually a big problem with watercolor. Usually it's the reverse. We don't we don't put enough paint down, or we don't make our washes as intense, meaning more saturated than diluted. Now, I just wanted to soften that line a little bit, so I just used a little scrubber and scrubbed that out. That's not a big problem. I think scrubbers are fine. I use them whatever gets the effect, right? I think John Singer Sargent would have used anything. In fact, he used candles in order to get like white shapes and texture. And the candles actually acted as a masking, okay? So that was before they had the rubberized masking fluid that we use today. So Sargent would have probably done exactly the same thing if he had needed it to get an effect. So, and that's really what we're after. any means necessary, again, within reason. You know, you don't want to be putting oil painting on a watercolor, but you want to try to get your paintings to be spontaneous and have that look. But if you do the embellishing, like the scrubbing, you know, like even adding a little bit of opaque paint, which is totally okay, as long as it doesn't look like it's done, and as long as you don't, you know, introduce like acrylic paint to a watercolor, you're fine. Gouache, if you're going to go with more opaque paint, white gouache is perfect. It's tintable. You can add more color to it if you need to. It's not just white out of the tube. So as we can see, we're getting closer to the end. I am putting in some remnants of an old dock back there, and here, talking about the opacity, I wanted a little coolness there. I wanted to open up that shadow shape. I felt it needed a little color. So this actually is not, believe it or not, that color is not white. I had bought a cerulean blue from a company called, it's actually Grumbacher's, I believe it's their student grade. It's called Academy. And for some reason, their cerulean blue must have a lot of white in it, because whenever I use it, I get that bright light effect, almost like an opaque gouache, but it's not gouache. And you could do the same thing with regular colors too. Like you can, now here in the foreground, I think you can see I added a little white for some highlights in the rocks. But as you look at it, you can't really tell that anything was really done. It's not obvious, and that's my point. Just try not to be, you know, try not to make those embellishments. I know I sound like a broken record, but don't make those embellishments look like you did something, right? The idea is to make them embellish, to kind of get what you painted a little better, but not make it so that the viewer would look at that as something that's out of place. That's all. That's really my point. All right, so here we go. More dark on that other side, just to, again, to bring your eye in from the right side of the paint, the picture right side of the painting, and start focusing into that effect area. Now, I'm going back with the trees. I feel like it needed just some more detail there. Those trees are just big blotches of ultramarine blue, a little bit of the purple, the dioxide purple, which was used throughout the painting to get those that landmass in the distance. And now I'm going back, I think, with a little bit of light tone, just to pump up that effect. And what happens too is when we're working with this with this paint. Now this is I wanted that line. For some reason it got a little too dark because my underwash was too dark. But you see, you can't even tell that that was actually done in opaque paint. And that was a little bit of gouache, or I believe it was my Pro White, which is really super opaque white paint. Okay, so I think we're almost at the end. I think we only have a few more minutes left. But yeah, paint upside down. If you need to get a certain stroke that you can't really get right side up, turn things upside down, move things around, paint sideways, right? That's always, you know, if you need paint to drip down, I always turn my my board or my block upside down, just let everything drip down. And then when you turn it up right side up, it's dripping down. So there you go. Now this is the unveiling. We're taking the tape off, and you can see that it's pretty bright, even though we do have a lot of dark areas. You know, that's what creates the contrast, right? Dark to light, right? So there it is. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit like, and I'll see you next time. Bye now.